أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. Continuing with our discussion on the topic of unity and diversity in Islamic history, we were discussing the disputes and the differences within the world of Shiism and Twelverism. We said we will be discussing these differences chronologically. We have already discussed from the 2nd century almost to the 11th, 12th century. Inshallah, we study the differences and the disputes today, starting from 11th to 12th century onwards, inshallah. One more thing I would like to discuss today is the issue of the return to the Quran. Inshallah, when we reach to it, I'll explain what it means. There's a concept the scholars discuss, al-aud ila al-Quran. Okay, so when we reach to it, inshallah, I will discuss what it is. So now, in the 11th, 12th century now, we had mentioned last week that Shaykh Mutahari says that Allama Majlisi is a moderate akhbari, yeah? And then you will see this from the statement he quotes here. You will understand that why is he a moderate akhbari, number one. To give you a context now to this statement of Allama Majlisi, one of the things, if anybody has studied the history of the Muslim understanding, one of the issues which the scholars and the theologians have discussed throughout history is whether what is material and what is immaterial, okay? What is material and what is metaphysical. So from the 3rd century onwards till the 12th century, almost there's a majority, if I would say a unanimous opinion within the Muslim scholars, this is including Shias and Sunnis, that there's nothing immaterial and metaphysical except God. Okay, so it's only Allah who is metaphysical and everything else is material. Now, this includes the soul and the angels also. Today, this is after the 12th century now, today we believe that no, we believe in the opposite. We believe that the angels, the soul is metaphysical and immaterial. Now, somebody might ask, why? What is so much important in this discussion? This discussion is very important, especially in sorting out some of the issues and the doubts coming from atheism and the issues related to Tawheed and the Day of Judgment. I've partially touched on this topic in my Ramadan lectures. For those of you who want to know more about it, they can refer to those lectures in the month of Ramadan. So keeping this in context in mind, that the Muslims used to believe that the soul and the angels are material entities, okay? This is where Allama Majlisi now comes and gives this statement. Notice he says, اعلم أنه أجمعت الإمامية بل جميع المسلمين. There's a consensus of all the Shia scholars and all the Muslims. Do you get me? All the Muslims and all the Shia scholars. Now, he says, except a few exceptions, who are the philosophers. So now the target is now the philosophers, okay? It's a dispute between Hadith, Muhaddithin, and the philosophers. Now, I'm interested in this statement. It says, الَّذِينَ أَدْخَلُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ بَيْنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. This is a very harsh criticism, wallahi. I don't know why we go to this level also. Allama Majlisi says that these philosophers infiltrated and penetrated the Muslim ummah. So the understanding is as if they are not Muslims. They penetrated the Muslims, they infiltrated the Muslims. Why? لِتَخْرِيبِ أُصُولِهِمْ وَتَضْيِيعِ عَقَائِدِهِمْ. The whole purpose of these philosophers coming in within Islam was to come and spoil all the beliefs of the Muslims, especially the Shias. Okay? And then he discusses the same issue of the angels and the soul. Okay, so he even used to believe that the soul is material, the angels are material also. Now, how do the philosophers do it? Notice, this is where methodology again comes in. He says they reinterpret numerous explicit verses. Okay, this statement now makes you understand that Allama Madlis is a moderate akhbari. Okay, that means he believes that the Quranic verses can be understood, and that is why he's saying that you can interpret them also. Opposite to the extreme akhbaris which we discussed last week. So, what do the philosophers do? They reinterpret numerous explicit verses in the Quran. Point number two, also to keep in mind, is also here that there are explicit verses in the Quran. Okay, so those who come and say that we cannot understand the Quran, we cannot comprehend the Quran, notice the statement of Allama Madlisi. So the philosophers reinterpret the numerous explicit verses and also the mutawatir traditions. Okay, now this is important. Relying on flimsy doubts and imaginary improbabilities. Okay, ala shubuhatin wahiya. They're useless doubts which they come up with, or they come up with unimaginary, imaginary improbabilities basically. And then he comes and says that it's a deviation from the path of guidance. And these are the people who follow the people of ignorance and blindness. Can you see how harsh the criticism is getting now? Okay. So, 3 points from this statement. Number one, the philosophers came into Islam, they were not part of Islam. That's one new angle we are getting. Okay. This is something we even see this that. They're outsiders. Today also we are being told, yeah, that this is an agent of this group, and this is an agent of this group, and he's come in and he's trying to spoil in our beliefs. Okay, so one, the philosophers were outsiders, they were not Muslims. Number two, they came to corrupt the beliefs of the Muslims. Number three, they they reinterpret the verses the way they want, according to the doubts which they have in their mind. And thus, they are following the people of ignorance and blindness. Similar to what we saw for Sayyid Murtada speaking against Sheikh Kulaini and the Muhaddithin. And we saw Shaitani in the previous lecture also speaking about taqleed and how scholars do taqleed of some of the movements. Similarly, Allama Madlis is also saying that his philosophers are just blindly following the Greek philosophers. Okay? This is Allama Madlisi. Now, this opposition towards philosophy and mysticism has not ended. Okay, it's still prevalent till date today. If you go to Najaf and Syria, the seminary of Najaf and Syria is even more hard towards these topics. The way we're being told that there's a lot of opposition towards philosophy and mysticism in Syria and in Najaf. In Iran, it's a bit better. So I'm going to quote a statement from a scholar in Iran to show you that this opposition is very prevalent. Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani, he's a living marja at the moment in Qom also. Look at what he says. He says that we did not recognize Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Okay, we as Shias did not recognize Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. If we had known this Imam, we would have not followed this and that. Okay, then he says what we followed. He says that we would have not regurgitated the vomit. Look at the language now. This is another angle altogether now coming up of the dispute. That we would have not repeated the vomit of the Greek philosophers. Can you see what he calls his philosophy as? Those philosophers, they're great scholars who teach philosophy in the Hausa. According to this scholar, is like they're just regurgitating the vomit of the Greek philosophers, we would have not digested the garbage. Look at the language, the garbage of mysticism. And because we did that, we became lost and wretched, and we were deprived from the ocean of knowledge of the Imams alayhi salam. Can you see this opposition towards mysticism and philosophy is still going on? Okay. Now, I want to touch on something else also. Now, here I want to, the example I'm giving is this is another angle of dispute. The reason I'm giving this example is to show you that sometimes we are even disputing and fighting over petty issues which are not fundamentals of religion or Shiism. Okay, they are not at all from the usul, they are not from the fundamentals, but still we are fighting over these issues to the level of doing takfir also. It's strange. Okay, now, uh, for those of you following up, I had mentioned this example when I was mentioning the Sunnis. You notice that the big fight which is going on within the Barelvis and the Deobandis, one of the major issues is about istighatha. Okay, can we call upon the Prophet according in the Sunni world or the awliya? In the Shia world now also we are seeing the same. That we are seeing people now disputing over with each other over this issue of istighatha. Now, this is a challenge I put now. Anybody who has seen or any statement from a scholar from scholars throughout century which shows that istighatha is a fundamental part of religion, is a fundamental part of Shiism, then we can at least, I haven't seen any, if they can show us this. Now, when something is not a fundamental part of religion, it's not anything, what they call it from the daruriyat. So if somebody can differ on that, why are we going to the level of doing even takfir of each other? This is my question. Yeah, we go to petty issues and fight on these petty and minute issues. So before I come to this example I want to give on the syllabus change in seminaries, there was a look at this how much we petty we become. This was an example I heard it. I used to visit a mosque here in Qom. So there was a discussion going on in the parliament. I don't know if it's still going on or not. Where is it reached? What was the conclusion? I don't know also. But there was a discussion going on in the Iranian politics that the holidays in Iran should be shifted from Thursday to Saturday. Okay, so at the moment in Iran, the holidays on Thursday and Friday. So the suggestion by some parliamentarians was this, that the holiday should be shifted from Thursday to Saturday. So holiday should be on Friday and Saturday. The reason behind this was an economic reason. The philosophy was this, that some of the parliamentarians were saying the see, Iran is losing out on 4 days. If Thursday and Friday is holiday in Iran, Saturday and Sunday is holiday throughout the world, then Iran is losing out on the economic benefits 4 days in a week. That means they only have 3 days in a week to do financial transactions. So what they were suggesting is that if you bring the holiday from Thursday to Saturday, then at least Iran will get the Thursday as an extra day for working economically. And the banks also will be able to operate for them. Now, this was, I heard it myself. This is not hearsay. The Imam Jama'at in the masjid I used to visit strangely comes and makes statements which were so mind-boggling. He comes and accuses these parliamentarians by saying these are agents of Zionists and they are proposing and they are trying to, further the whole agenda of the Zionists. Very strange. Where are you taking the whole issue? They are giving you a reason, they're giving you a philosophy, but now the accusation goes on to, oh, these are agents of Zionists and these are agents of, this is exactly what I was saying just minutes ago, that anything which happens where we can't have answers, very quickly we divert. We say these are agents of Zionists and agents of CIA and agents of, I don't know, Wahhabis and agents of, Ya Allah, before you make this accusation, please come up with any reasoning, please come up with your evidence, nothing. And we are seeing this happening even in the scholarly world. This was an Imam Jamaat making this accusation, okay? What I'm trying to make the point is that we are fighting now on petty issues, okay? So one of those issues is the syllabus change in the seminaries. So there's a huge discussion within seminaries that whether the syllabus should be changed in the seminary, the books we are studying, should they be changed, should they be modernized, okay, should new books come in, what, these are discussions going on till date, they are going on. Now Sabrina Mervin, she's a French researcher, she's done a lot of research on Shiism, contemporary Shiism, okay, rather she has written also articles on Muharram and the rituals of Shiite communities also. She writes this article, The Clerics of Jabal Amil and the Reform of the Religious Teaching in Najaf. Notice what she quotes. She says that Mohsin Sharara, one of those students who came to study in Najaf, he was proposing a syllabus change in Najaf. You see, those who have studied in universities, some of them are proposing that to go with time, we need to be able to change the syllabus we are studying. Now, notice where it went. He says Mohsin Sharara had triggered the anger of the conservatives in Najaf to the point where he was declared an infidel by some mujtahid. Can you notice where it did go? A person is just suggesting that syllabus should be changed. He's now being branded as a kafir. Okay, this is where it goes. Now, when you do this, look at the result. Now, this is exactly why I keep on saying that when we turn away the students, okay, when we turn away these youths from the questions they ask, then they'll turn away altogether. This is something I discussed even earlier also. Notice it says, these young clerics called for a renewal of literature. Thus, several amongst them later drop on and embrace communism. Notice criticisms were not handled, they couldn't be tolerated. Some of them converted and left Islam altogether towards communism. Now, Mohsin Sharara didn't, but that's the example. Two of the other scholars left, and they left towards communism. Okay. Now, somebody might say that, oh, this is a French lady. You're giving an example of a French lady. So I've said also before that let's stick to evidences. Okay. Evidence comes from anyone. As long as they're giving evidences, let's stick to that evidence. You have contrary evidence, present the contrary evidence, okay, to prove that person wrong. But fortunately or unfortunately, now how do you put it, that this whole issue of syllabus has been discussed by our scholars also. Okay, so this is an example I'm giving from Ayatollah Shahid Mutahari. I'll be reading statement by statement because they're very sensitive statements and they're very harsh criticism towards the seminary of what's the situation of Quran in the Hausa and the seminary. Now, it reached to a level, to give you another context of how this is happening. Some of you might get surprised with these statements. This is not new, but it might be surprising. This was surprising even for people in Qom. So, in the month of Ramadan, uh, in the national media, they do arrange for lectures to be given in the morning at Sahar time, the way we say Daku, yeah, when people wake up for Daku and Sahri. So they take the opportunity in that period because people are eating. So they invite scholars to come and speak on the national television. Okay. So 2 years in a row, scholars now are being deplatformed. Basically, scholars come in, they criticize, the criticisms are not tolerated, they are deplatformed and they're removed from the national media. So one of those scholars was this year. Now, I don't know why the last year's scholar was removed, but this year's scholar, one of the reasons was this, what I'm going to quote, that when this scholar was mentioning these issues about the state of Quran in the Hausa, the interviewer was getting more and more perplexed. He was getting more and more surprised. Really, can the state of the Hausa and seminary be like this? Now, he was surprised being in Qom. Okay, so these statements might come as a surprise to few or some of you, but these are the statements written, and thus I'm quoting it verbatim from Ayatollah Mutahari. Okay, so he says, notice he starts by saying, if someone's knowledge is rooted in the Quran, that means a scholar is studying Quran, is studying tafsir. How much respect does a person hold amongst us? Amongst us meaning seminarians. Okay, how much respect does a person involving in Quran and Quranic studies hold respect in the Hausa in the Islamic seminary? Sheikh Mutahari says none. Okay, hitch. Okay, nothing, none. He respects, is not given any respect at all. But he says, but if someone masters Kifayat al-Usul, Kifayat al-Usul is a book of Usul al-Fiqh, okay, principles of jurisprudence related to fiqh also. They are considered a respected and distinguished figure. See the difference? So if somebody studies jurisprudence, he's a respected and honorable figure within the seminary. But if somebody studies Quran, then they are not respected, they're not honored at all. And then Shaykh Mutahari goes on to say that the Quran itself is neglected amongst us meaning amongst the seminarians. Okay, these are not my statements, these are his statements. Rather, I personally also cry over these statements that what have I done for the Quran? Okay, being in the seminary, what have I done for the Quran? It is precisely this abandonment of the Quran that has led us to such misery and calamity. Okay, Sheikh Mutahari is saying that the calamity and the misery the Muslims are going through, it's because we have abandoned the Quran. And then he quotes that famous verse of the Quran where the Prophet will complain on the Day of Judgment. Now, he then goes on further. The criticism becomes even harder, wallahi. He says one of the scholars visited Iraq and he met Ayatollah Khoy, rahmatullah alayh, in Iraq. And then he asked him a question. He asks him, Agha, why did you abandon tafsir of Quran which you used to teach? So for those of you aware, Al-Bayan, I guess it's translated by prolegomena something in English. This was the tafsir lessons Ayatollah Khoy had started, but it never continued. So now that is the question this scholar is asking Ayatollah Khoy, is that how come you abandon these tafsir lessons? Look at the answers, huh? Look at the answer. The answer is very painful, wallahi. He says there are obstacles and challenges in teaching Quranic tafsir and exegesis in the seminary. Ya Allah. Teaching fiqh and usul, there are no obstacles. But when it comes to Quran, there are obstacles. So he says, I turned back to Ayatollah Khoy and asked him, but how come Allama Tabatabai continued the work in Qom and dedicated his life to teaching Quran? Now notice Ayatollah Khoy's answer. He says that Allama Tabatabai made a sacrifice. Notice, خودشون را قربانی کردن. He sacrificed himself, socially degrading his status. Okay? از نظر شخصیت اجتماعی ساقط شدن. People would not honor him and respect him anymore as a scholar. Very strange. When Quran is being studied by somebody's pondering over the Quran, his social status in the seminary is downgraded. But when he studies fiqh, now I'm not saying one or the other, okay? What I'm trying to say is Quran, which is our primary book, which was supposed to be given the highest respect. This is what's going on in the seminaries. So Ayatollah Mutahari then says that he spoke the truth. That means what Ayatollah Khoui says, he endorses what Ayatollah Khoui is saying. And then he continues, he doesn't stop there. He says, it is astonishing that in the most sensitive religious circles amongst us, if someone dedicates their life to studying the Quran, they face countless hardships, losing their livelihood, social standing, respect, and everything else. Why have we reached where we have reached? Okay? Yet he says if somebody spends life studying jurisprudential texts, they gain everything. Okay? So you want to gain everything, study fiqh and jurisprudence. If you want to lose everything, study the Quran. And that is why then he goes on further by saying that you will see the students and the scholars in the houses, in the seminaries, when you give them a fiqh text, a jurisprudential text, they can maneuver it up and down. But when it comes to Quran, look at what Ayatollah Mutahari says. But you cannot find even two people who truly understand the Quran. This is in the Hausa. Huh? If you ask anyone about a Quranic verse, they say you must refer to the Quranic tafsir. A scholar has to refer to the Quranic tafsir. But when it comes to fiqh, they just give their opinions. Okay? Now, he goes on further by finishing by saying that what is even more astonishing is that this generation, that means the generation of the elders where Ayatollah Mutahari was speaking about, he's saying the way they treated the Quran, now they're expecting that the new generation should come and read the Quran and act upon it and understand it. He says it's not possible. When you yourself abandon the Quran and then you expect your new generation to come and understand it. Okay, now somebody might say that this is a statement from Ayatollah Mutahari, this was 30, 40 years back. I'll come to the statement of Ayatollah Khamenei just given recently, okay? But before I go into that, this is a state within the Sunnis also. Okay, so somebody should not think this is the state of the Shias only. The seminaries of the Sunnis also is going through the same state. Okay, the only difference is that when the Sunnis enter the seminaries, they they do hifz al-Quran. They memorize the Quran initially, which the Shia seminaries don't do. Apart from that, there is no contemplation on the Quran. There's no Quranic tafsir. All they go into is fiqh and hadith. They will complete Bukhari and Muslim and the fiqh of Hanafis and Shafis and whatever. But when you ask them Quran, nothing. Okay, they can repeat the verses, they memorize it nicely, but when you sit to discuss, you see that there's no understanding. Now this is not me saying it, this is Ustad Nu'man Ali Khan, who is a Sunni himself. He has dedicated his life for Quran for almost 20 plus years now. He has a lecture, it's a beautiful lecture for those who can listen, lessons for the ummah from the past, present and future. Okay, this is the title of the video. He gives two examples. He says there's a scholar who came in my library. Now, was it at home or was it in his office? I didn't get the context there. But he visited the library of Ustad Nu'man Ali Khan. He says he started looking at the different books of tafsir and he was like, oh, you're using these books of tafsir. So he turns back to Nu'man Ali Khan and tells him that, can you please list down for me these tafsir? That means this scholar didn't even know the names of these tafasir also. Can you see where it has reached also? Okay, this is a Sunni scholar who studied in the seminary, okay, but he doesn't know the list even. Leave alone the tafasir itself. The list of the names of the tafasir also, he doesn't know. Okay, which scholar discusses what kind of tafsir is something which is altogether a subject which is to be known. Now, the second incident which Ustad Nu'man Ali Khan mentions, he says that I went to Dr. Akram al-Nadawi, apparently a scholar he praises. He says, I tell him and I ask him, can you please show me schools where I can study Quran? Look at the question, yeah? He's asking, Ustad Nu'man Ali Khan is asking Dr. Nadawi that, can you please show me schools where I can study Quran? Noman Ali Khan says that he could tell me only 2, 3 schools, while there are hundreds and thousands of schools and seminaries which teach which teach fiqh and hadith. Can you see the contrast which is happening? Okay, this is something similar to what is happening in our part of the world also. Now, this was the statement I was talking about. So somebody says Ayatollah Mutahhari's statement was 30, 40 years old. Ayatollah Khamenei made this statement just a few weeks ago, I guess 2, 3 weeks ago, when he was unveiling the tafsir of Tasneem of Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. For those of you aware, it's an 80-volume tafsir which Ayatollah Khamenei unveiled it. Okay, so when in the opening of this tafsir, when unveiling this tafsir, he made this statement. Now, again, the statements are very hard to fathom. Sometimes we might get surprised that, oh, am I putting my own words? I'll read word by word. Allah says that as for the topic of Quranic interpretation, Quranic tafsir in seminaries, in the Hawza, it must be acknowledged that the seminaries have been lacking in this area. This is a scholar saying just recently, who is at the heart of the seminary. Over time, our various seminaries have done very little in this regard. You see these statements, okay? Now, then he goes on to say that this effort was started by Allama Tabatabai. Before him, there was no tafsir. Rather, when he started his tafsir lessons in Qom, notice he says, maximum 50 people attended his lessons. 50 out of the 1,000 students in Qom. Only 50 attended the Quran lessons. Okay? Now, he says before him, before Allama Tabatabai, there was no such activity in Qom Seminary, and certainly not in Najaf Seminary. Okay? So there was no activities of tafsir and Quran contemplation in Qom and not at all in Najaf. Okay, he gives an example of Marhum Balaghi. Ayatollah Balaghi has written Ala ur-Rahman fi Tafsir al-Quran. He was an Iraqi scholar. He's written a tafsir which is just reached Surah An-Nisa, so it was just a small effort, and he couldn't finish this tafsir. That's the only thing happened in Iraq in terms of Quran. All what is coming out is what? Fiqh and usul. And that is why he says, Wali on qari ke tawaqqu'u mirawad az yek fawza'i, the expectation you have from a student of seminarian, okay, in terms of expounding religious knowledge, it says, Aslan fasile ba'on khayli ziyadast. We are very far away from that goal we have to achieve. Do you get me? This is Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, he gives an example, similar example to what Ayatollah Mutahhari gave. He gives also an example of another friend of his. And this is a scholar who is a mujtahid. Huh? He says that what is the result? Look at what has happened. The result of all this abandonment of the Quran, look at it, what is happening. He says the result is that many of our great and famous scholars often lacked familiarity with Quranic concepts. This is not me saying it. This is Ayatollah Khamenei saying it. That the scholars are lacking familiarity with the Quran. Okay, so then he gives an example. He says that there was a scholar I knew in Najaf. Apparently, he used to be discussing and having discussions with him. He says he came to Iran after having studied, becoming a mujtahid and all whatnot. This scholar now happened to bump on Tafsir al-Safi. Tafsir al-Safi, for those of you know of Mullah Faiz Kashani, is not a very, how do I put it, that it's not a very extensive tafsir. Rather, it's a tafsir where he has quoted some of the riwayat and few footnotes here and there. So it's not a very extensive tafsir. It's a very basic, some kind of tafsir. But this scholar who came from Najaf was amazed by Tafsir al-Safi of Mullah Faiz Kashani. So Ayatollah Khamenei says that now you see how much content is there in Tafsir al-Safi that would astonish a mujtahid who has studied years in Najaf. This was the state of the seminaries. اوکی حالا شما ببینید چقدر مطالب در تفسیر صافی وجود دارد که یک مجتهد ملای سالها درس خونده در نجف را متعجب میکند. A scholar who has studied for years by looking at tafsir al-Safi is getting amazed. This is showing that the little they know about the Quran. Now he goes further giving his own example. And this statement is very hard. Later, when we come discuss in later future discussions, similar statements come out from Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. Those who have spent time in the Quran, they have the same complaint. Allama Tabatabai, Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, Ayatollah Sadiq Tehrani, they all complain of the same issue in the seminary. These people who dedicated their time for Quran. Notice what Ayatollah Khamenei says. He says before the revolution, he used to involve himself in the Quranic discussions, and thus he has books of Quran and on tafsir also. He's telling now his own students. He says, I used to tell the students that the state of the seminary is such that the moment we start, okay, so he quotes this statement, Bidan ayyadakallah. It's a statement which is quoted in Jami al-Muqaddamat in the books of grammar. It's something where the student is starting, he's told the statement in the books of grammar. So Ayatollah Khamenei has a book compiled with this name also. These are statements of his towards the seminarians and the students of the seminary with the same title, okay? So he says, he tells the students that when we start studying in the seminary, until we receive the permission for ijtihad throughout these years, look at the statement, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. He says that تا وقتی اجازه اجتهاد میگیریم در طول این سالها میتوانیم حتی یک بار احتیاج پیدا نکنیم به این که بلند شویم و از روی تاقچه قرآن را برداریم. الله اکبر الله اکبر. It's something you have to cry over, you know. I personally also. He says that a student can become a mujtahid and not feel a need to even pick up the Quran from the shelf throughout his studies. This is the state of the seminary. Okay? The only time we look at the verses is wherein it's in the literature, books like Mughni and Suyuti and the like. Otherwise, neither in our jurisprudence, look at the statement, nor in our literature, nor in our fundamental research do we feel even the need to get up and take the Quran. Can you see, this is a very recent statement Ayatollah Khamenei makes. Okay? Now, he then says that there's a movement which has started in Qom now, the 200 plus Quranic tafsir classes going on in the seminary. Research needs to be done further on this, what kind of tafsir, how much tafsir, what effect are they doing tafsir of the jurisprudential verses, or they're doing tafsir even further the way the likes of Ayatollah Jawadi and Allama did. So this is something which research needs to be done. But notice he goes back to, again, speaking of his own, he rather says that I did not know that there are 200 Quranic interpretation classes in the Qom seminary. Okay, that means he himself was unaware of it, that this is going on in the Hausa also. But then he goes back to his complaint again. He says, but make sure that this reference to tafsir and Quran classes becomes a stable culture. درس تفسیر یک فرهنگ با ثبات بشود. That means it should remain a permanent discussion in the Hausa, not that it's a temporary movement, just starts and then because of the hardships it's abandoned altogether. In kar naqs shimorode nashawad. tafsir should not be considered a defect and a deficiency. Can you see where and where have we reached? Okay, I don't want to further discuss this. He says that mullai dar tafsir ham bi ma'nai mulla shudan bashad. That a scholar, the way he becomes, is considered a scholar in fiqh. A person who studies tafsir and the Quran should also be considered a scholar. Rather, I would say should be considered even a higher scholar than the one who has done fiqh and usul. Then he goes on completing by saying that does someone repeating the same statement of Ayatollah Shaheed Mutahari, rahmatullah alayh. He says, does someone who has mastery over the Quranic verses, their meanings and concepts and implications, have the same level of respect and closeness in the seminaries? No. Okay? He says this needs to be corrected. Okay? Now, this is what Ayatollah Khamenei was referring to. Ayatollah Arafi, the head of the House of Qom, in one of the seminars, he mentions the statistics of the classes and the lessons going in Qom. So he says there are almost 7,000 lessons going on in Qom daily. Now look at the stats, huh? Out of which 275 tafsir classes are going on. Can you see? 7,000 lessons, 275 lessons. Now, it's a good start. I'm not denying this is a good start. It's a good beginning. But I hope this continues the way Agha also said it. I hope it becomes a culture. But what needed to happen was the opposite. Quran was supposed to be higher, and fiqh and usul was supposed to be lower, because this is the book of God. Okay? Then he says that 227 philosophy classes, 66 theology classes, and 17 mysticism classes. That means almost 6,400 classes are going on in usul and fiqh. Okay? Now, I thought I stop here on the issues of the differences and the conflicts which is going on in the Shia world. I touched on one thing today. Rather, I started with the issue of the 12th century of Allama Majlisi, and then I came up to say that the petty issues upon which we are fighting, and then I brought up the whole issue of the change of syllabus. And then I was forced to bring examples by showing that this whole discussion of force and change in syllabus is not something which is only outsiders are quoting it. Even scholars are also discussing it. But I thought because we have discussed the Quran, I would like to discuss one more issue related to the Quran and we finish. And it's somehow related to the discussion we are having. There are four movements within the world of Islam. This is Shias and Sunnis, about the whole issue of al-aud ila al-Quran, or in Farsi they say bazgasht bil-Quran. In English we translate return to the Quran. This is a movement which was started especially in the 19th and 20th century, Gregorian. Okay? This is a movement of scholars who are trying to propose that let's go back to the Quran. That means because Quran has been abandoned, now they're proposing let's go back to the Quran. What we saw statements from the scholars, this is exactly what they are proposing. But there are four movements in regards to this whole issue. The first movement started with the whole advancement and the coming of modernism. So the advancement of technology and advancement of the West and where it has gone in technology and where it has reached, and the backwardness of the Muslims. This is where some Muslim scholars sat up and say that why are we backward? Okay? Why are we lacking behind? What has happened to the Muslims? So a few scholars come up and say that the reason we Muslims are backward is because we have abandoned the Quran. This is the same statement Ayatollah Mutahari also makes, yeah? That the misery and the calamity the Muslim Ummah is facing is because it has moved away from the Quran. Okay? So these scholars, the likes of Sayyid Jamaluddin Afghani, okay, and then his teacher Sheikh Muhammad Abdu in Egypt, and then the student of Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, Sheikh Rashid or Sheikh Rashid Reza, Said Qutb, okay, in within the Shia world, Ayatollah Taliqani and Imam Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei and Imam Musa Sadr, and the list is there, who have now proposed this, that are saying if we want to catch up with the advancement, if we also want to be progressive as Muslims, then we need to return back to the Quran. Al-aud ila al-Quran. We have to go back to the Quran itself. Okay? Now, uh, majority of them focused on a socio-political understanding of the Quran. Okay, so they were proposing that we make up principles from the Quran for how to live in this modern world and how to uh, live with these advancements. Okay, so the primary focus was not tafsir for all of these scholars, though they have tafsir also. So a lot of these scholars, okay, Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, Rashid Rida, Said Qutb, Ayatollah Taliqani, okay, Imam Khomeini started a tafsir lesson. Ayatollah Khamenei has discussions on tafsir also. But the focus was this. Now, and that is why, for example, this is Ayatollah Khamenei. This is a book written by one of the people. It's named as Nime Khordad, where he has compiled the statements and the thinking of Ayatollah Khamenei in this book. Okay, it's been published by uh, the the books, the printers who are printing the works of Ayatollah Khamenei. Yeah. So notice he says, "Baz andishi dar mafahim dini." Now, this is something which some people get uncomfortable with. When you talk about reforms, they said, "Oh, reform is a bad word." This is what exactly Ayatollah Khamenei is calling towards. There's a need to reform. There's a need to reassess and reevaluate our understanding of religion altogether. Okay, and that is why you notice that Ayatollah Khamenei is proposing this: that if we want to survive in this modern world, okay, well, we don't give in to the modern challenges also, not that we give in altogether to the modern understanding, not that we even become rigid and deny progress altogether. So we had scholars who we've seen these fatwas, yeah, to the extent that they denied printing press, they denied the radio when the television came in, they denied the television, they gave fatwas that you're not allowed to use it and all. This is rigidity on one side. So this is exactly what Ayatollah Khamenei is referring to. That not that you accept everything coming from the West and not that you deny altogether. There's no rigidity. There has to be some middle path. And that he is saying that only be done by return to the Quran. Okay, this whole concept of return to the Quran. So my time is going, otherwise, Imam Musa Sadr has a similar statement also. Uh, One more thing which Sheikh Abdu and his student Sheikh Rashid Rida in Egypt came up with when they wrote Al-Manar, when Sheikh Rashid Rida wrote Al-Manar, he focused on the modern issues. He says that if we want to address the modern issues, now those were socio-political issues, these were intellectual and academic issues now. He says if we want to sort these academic and intellectual issues, we again need to go back to the Quran. Okay, but how do you go to the Quran? He says the only way to go through is through ijtihad. Okay, so this is a good article by Abdullah Saeed, where he discusses trends in contemporary Islam. He discusses the different trends which are there within the academic world. So one of them, he calls them the classical modernists. This is where he puts the likes of Sheikh Abdu and Sheikh Rashid Rida and them, and Sayyid Jamaluddin Afghani and them. Yeah. He says what they did was they believed that the modern context demands a reprisal and a re-evaluation of the Muslim heritage and requires giving up the blind imitation of early scholars. Okay, so one thing that we're calling for was that we need to reassess the teachings, okay, and that is through going to the Quran and understanding ourselves, not sticking to the understanding of the previous scholars, okay. Rather, they were saying that we need to come and understand ourselves and apply it for the modern context we are living in. Yeah. Now, the focus was more on rationalism and reason also. And that is why, if you read Tafsir al Manar, in places where he discusses these modern issues, a lot of reasoning is being promoted. Okay, so this was one movement. The second movement is the movement of those scholars who called, so they said if we go back to the Quran, but we don't go back to the Quran sticking to the same things which has been happening, studying Quran via hadith and studying Quran via theology. No, we have to study Quran via Quran itself. Okay, and this is coming up from some of the hadith we have, that the Quran interprets itself. Yeah, we have even a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam which says that the Quran is tafsir of its own self. You don't need an outsider to come and do the tafsir. Okay, now it's not that they reject a hadith. Okay, inshallah, if further we discuss this issue, they don't reject hadith, but they say Quran is nur. If you refer to the statements from Ayatollah Jawadi also, you will see that they say that Quran is nur, it can light itself. Okay, inshallah, as we go further, we might elaborate on this further and the whole methodology. Now, for those of you who are aware, the preface of Al-Mizan is very clear on this issue, where Allama Tabatabai speaks about 4 different methodologies, 4 or 5, where he says that all these methodologies have deficiencies, and the only way to study Quran is Quran through Quran. Okay, so he even says that Quran through Hadith, as he discusses the pros and the cons, and then he says it's still not enough to understand the Quran. Ya Allah, my time. I'll come and quote this sometime later, inshallah, when I discuss Quran later. The third movement is the movement of those who now say that we should return back to Quran by criticizing hadith. Okay, now the criticism is not normal criticism which every scholar does. Okay, every scholar would say there's hadith has problems and has issues and all whatnot. These scholars took their criticism a level higher. The criticisms were very harsh towards hadith. They used to believe that it's the it's the hadithi understanding, it's a traditional muhaddithin understanding which is stopping us from understanding the Quran and thus progressing and having those ideas which are according to these people some strange ideas. Okay, so the likes of, for example, Ayatollah Saleh Najaf Abadi, for those of you who have read of him, Ayatollah Sayyid Kamal Haidari recently, to that extent that he has a series of lectures that from Islam of Hadith to Islam of Quran now. Okay, he criticizes Hadith, and thus he was also removed from the national television here in Iran also. And then in the Sunni world, we have the likes of Sheikh Farhan al-Maliki, who is from Saudi. He's been imprisoned. Allah, Ya Allah, Allah. We pray to Allah that Allah should free him and he should continue with the work he was doing. He was accused of being a Shia. His views are very interesting views for those who have heard him and studied him. He also is proposing the same within the Sunni world also. So I'm quoting him. He has a website, almaliki.org, for those of you who can refer to these discussions of his. Now, some of the things he says, we agree with it, some of it, we don't agree with it. Okay, now I'm just quoting him. The issues which I agree with him, please refer to my second lecture in this series. Portion of it is discussed, I've discussed it there also. Notice how he discusses. He says that what leads people astray from the path of God is not singing and clapping. Okay, so he's discussing this verse of Surah Furqan of Lahw al-Hadith, yeah? That he's saying that people translate it as music and clapping and singing. This is not it. But rather, بل هو الروايات والأحاديث والأقاعد. Okay? What is leading people astray from the path of God is the narrations, the ahadith, the beliefs, and the sermons that follow one path, while the book of God follows another path. Okay? So, what he's trying to say is hadith is one world altogether, and in contrast, you will see the Quran on the contrasting and the opposite side altogether. He says these are true distractions, lahw al hadith, okay, which the Quran discusses. And then he says, if you examine the verses describing those who lead others astray from the path of God, you will find that they are people of religious knowledge, not the people of entertainment. Okay, so it's the religious knowledge, according to Sheikh Farhan al-Maliki, who are leading people astray. And partially, I discussed this in my second lecture. Now, I say, as I said, I don't fully accept what he's saying, but partially, I've discussed this issue in the second lecture. Rather, the statement which the Saudi government gave, accusing him of and imprisoning him, they say, why did we imprison him? They said the reason we imprisoned him is because he is questioning the fundamentals of Islam. Okay, everybody has the same issues, yeah? By doing what? So he's questioning the fundamentals of Islam by defaming the Sunnah, the prophetic hadith, and their sources. By claiming that some of the companions made up these riwayats, okay? This is something which he discusses a lot. And then he also questioned the validity of the ahadith narrated by Bukhari. Okay, the ahadith narrated by Al-Bukhari for the Sunnis, it's basically a hujjah altogether, even though if there's so many hadith which are questionable, but majority of the Sunnis believe it's hujjah altogether. Uh, because he questioned Al-Bukhari, this is why he was imprisoned, okay? This is the third movement. And the fourth movement is the movement of Quranists, which we don't agree with at all. These are people who, these are thinkers who come and say that Quran is enough. All the ahadith are attributed to the Prophet centuries later. This is exactly what the Orientalists also promote. Okay, some of the Orientalists before the 90s and the 2000s, they were promoting the same thing, that the ahadith were made up later, 2-3 centuries after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so the likes of Dr. Ahmad Subhi Mansour, he's the famous founder. I don't know if you can call him the founder, but he's the one who is the biggest proponent of this movement from Egypt. He was a student in Al Azhar, and then he promotes this understanding. So he's exiled from Egypt and goes to US, settles in US, forms his own institution, and is promoting this kind of thinking. Okay. So in conclusion, there are four movements basically calling up for return back to the Quran because of the state we are in. Okay, and these are the movements which we discussed. Let's pray to Allah to give us the tawfiq to be able to again unite the hearts, to be able to reach that understanding that we can agree to disagree with each other, and inshallah make our hearts get together inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.